This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. You know, you want to do something for this country? You want to improve the quality of your life and your children's lives? One thing you can do is stop obsessing about Donald Trump Jr.'s email chains and start paying a little bit more attention to what's going on in your school system from pre-K through post-secondary. Pay attention to your kids' schools. You know who shows up to school board meetings? A handful of people. You know who pays attention to what teachers are teaching, what administrators are doing, the agenda that they're advancing, not to mention when you send your kids off to college or when you send your check off to dear alma mater to underwrite totalitarianism on college campuses. You know where this ends? You know where financing cultural Marxists ends? It ends at Evergreen State College. Brett Weinstein, a cultural Marxist. He calls himself a progressive, but I'll translate that for you. Professor on campus who was ostracized because he's not Marxist enough, not totalitarian enough, not for the students that have been empowered by professors, unfortunately, like Weinstein, and administrators who are just children in adult bodies, and took over the campus of Evergreen State College and want Weinstein fired because he dared to oppose a blacks-only day on campus where white people shall leave. Last week, the Board of Trustees, such as it is at Evergreen State, held a meeting. And Weinstein, to his credit, is continuing to make his case against a bridge too far for even him. Here's what he had to say, telling the Board of Trustees, you must not be aware of the anarchy that reigned on our campus over the last month, because certainly if you knew all these things, you would do something about it.
I'm forced to conclude that you must not fully understand what has happened, because if you did fully understand what has happened, you would be forced to act in the interest of Evergreen. So in that light, I want to just simply pose some questions to you about things that I think you need to know that perhaps you don't. Do you know that the college descended into literal anarchy, and that for days the campus was not under the control of the state? It was under the control of protesters. That there were assaults, there were batteries, there was pressure not to report crimes to the police. People were, by the legal definition, I believe, kidnapped and imprisoned. That included faculty members and administrators. Others were hunted on the campus. That lawless bands roamed the campus unimpeded. Police were physically and intentionally blocked by protesters. Police were cruelly, systematically, and personally taunted. They were humiliated and forced to stand down by the president. Students that held different opinions were, by the protesters' own analysis, stalked, harassed, and doxxed.
So out-of-state tuition for Evergreen State College, $24,000. If you want to put that on the college tour list when you take the kids checking out where they're going to go to college. So you want to spend $50,000, $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 for this for your child? Do you want to underwrite it through the federal loan programs for college students? Oh, by the way, it's not just colleges. Going back to K-12. Edina High School in suburban Minneapolis. Which
Edina?
Edina, excuse me. Edina High School in suburban Minneapolis.
College roommate went there to Edina.
We've talked about it before after they gave in to the barbarians there, the anti-intellectuals, the frauds. Edina, long regarded as one of the country's top high schools. Well, after Trump got elected, everybody showed who they are. 80 Edina High School teachers, which represent pretty much the entire faculty, signed an editorial in the school's newspaper that was basically a Democrat Party manifesto. Powerline blog and John Hinderaker has had great stuff on this. He writes, not many things shock me, but I confess that I've been shocked by what I've learned about the Edina public school system. Indoctrination in left-wing politics begins in elementary school, where children are taught the pernicious doctrine of white privilege. In Edina, not even bus drivers are exempt. They, too, are required to take political re-education classes.
Who's teaching the political re-education classes?
I guess the political re-educators that teach the kids.
Uh-huh.
from one student. The Powerline blog's been getting emails from students and parents since they've covered this. The day after the election, I was texting my mom to pick me up from school, and she almost had to. Every teacher was crying in class.
Mm-hmm.
One even told the whole class Trump is worse than 9/11 and the Columbine shooting. The amount of liberal propaganda that was pushed every single day in class this year was worse than it's ever been, and you're bullied by teachers and every student if you dare speak against it. The teachers can absolutely do whatever they want. The administration does nothing about it. The day of the election, every single student was in the comments chanting F Trump, and the teachers never did anything. A lot of people started to complain, and my mom has some friends who are leaving the school district. Well, you can flee, but you're running out of places to flee to. So at some point in these school systems, from pre-K to post-secondary, somebody's going to have to stand up and fight. One organization that's fighting from within this anti-intellectualism is the National Association of Scholars. These are academics that actually believe in the things that everyone espouses, but few abide these days, like intellectual freedom and academic integrity. And so we're pleased to be joined by Peter Wood again. Peter Wood, the president of the National Association of Scholars. Peter, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me back.
So Evergreen State College, sort of like Middlebury, but for different reasons, seems to be an inflection point in this whole discussion where maybe what's happening there is resonating at a deeper level than kind of your just customary, we want to hire a Shakespeare professor who teaches Shakespeare through a social justice lens story that you get daily. I wonder what you hear in terms of the reverberations of Evergreen State and what happened there through the halls of academia around the country.
Well, I think it is an inflection point in that what happened at Evergreen was so far beyond even the extremes that had already been set at places like Middlebury and Berkeley and Mizzou that it caught people's attention. It takes an extraordinary kind of outrage these days to break past this, what has become a daily onslaught of news about the misbehavior of students and faculty members and administrators, and Evergreen provided that. I think it was helpful that the victim in this case, Weinstein, was himself a progressive, and he was taken by surprise that his righteous stand in favor of social justice wasn't enough to make him safe from the physical attacks and the bullying and the persecution of the students around riot. And President Bridges of Evergreen set what must be the gold standard for cowardly accommodation of thugs.
Well, but it empowers them to the point of failure, because when they get into the real world, they're not going to be able to do what they want when they want to do it. Don't you agree?
Well, it depends on which real world they want to end. I think Evergreen is largely preparing students now for lives of being political activists of a fairly extreme kind. There's no doubt some good programs at Evergreen. I wouldn't send my own kid there, but the tone of it seems to be to prepare students for the life of a political protester who goes out on hire to advance the causes of the most radical factions in the country.
Well, that's
where you go.
Just to put an exclamation point on that, so we take the guesswork out of it. The interim provost at Evergreen wrote in a May 25th email that, quote, student protesters have diverted time and energy from their academic work to promote institutional change and social justice. That's how they describe rioting and all the things that Brett Weinstein described happened on campus in addressing the Board of Trustees. So this is actually a high intellectual pursuit, according to those in charge of so many colleges. At Oberlin, the Black Student Union demanded an $8.20 per hour wage for student protesters for their quote-unquote continuous organizing efforts, unquote. So, I mean, this is not something where this is where it leads. This is something where you're describing the reality on the ground.
Yeah, it's where we are right now. Last week, I published a piece in the Chronicle of Higher Education in response to the Chronicle inviting me as a sort of token conservative in their pages. And I traced the recent poll that showed that now a substantial majority of Republican voters think higher education is doing more harm to the country than good.
Right.
The interesting part of this was the very long string of comments that came in from the readers of the Chronicle of Higher Education, which ran about 90% outraged that I would say these things, that there's one good thing in higher education, some of these people say, and that's the current wave of protest. Everything else is troublesome to us, but that's the great thing, and how dare you criticize the one great thing? So there is a cheering section for what's happening at Evergreen and Middlebury, et cetera. People who think that it's just great. We've finally learned to stand up to the evil Republicans, the Trumpians, the Libertarians. Anybody who isn't on the left now should be, in the name of social justice, silenced, or maybe worse.
Or isn't far enough on the left, like Brett Weinstein?
Right. Exactly.
So are you reassured at all that this memo came out on Friday saying that you can no longer aggressively shout down faculty members, you can no longer block campus exit because that's illegal and could result in criminal charges?
Well, I'll be reassured when I see that there is action that follows those words. There are a lot of empty words that echo around in higher education. Colleges that proclaim they're in favor of academic freedom and intellectual freedom and freedom of speech, but when it's put to the test, they're not, and they are ready to accommodate those who silence free speech.
Well, since you brought up the Chronicle of Higher Education too, I mean, just understand where the problem is. As much time as we focus on these teenage, young adult thugs, where does this come from? Well, I mean, I guess to some extent the home, but to a large extent. That you have persons with the same sensibility in the professorate and in the administration. And in the same Chronicle of Education outlet you were describing, Chronicle of Higher Education outlet, we talked about it last week, this expansive think piece on the real problem in higher ed, according to the perspective of a couple of professors and a PhD student in gender studies.
Mm-hmm.
A real problem?
You took that course at Northwestern.
Sure yeah. I didn't go for my doctorate, though. The real problem, summer vacation.
Oh.
Summer vacation, you get the summer doldrums. You get the summer slump, Peter. And so there needs to be more kind of wraparound services for these overpaid professors and coddled grad students so that they don't slump in the summer when they lose the regimentation of their schedule.
Well, the programs in colleges these days put huge emphasis on volunteering for social justice activities, and I'm sure there's lots of occasions over the course of the summer to sign up for a Trump protest or something like that.
Sure, yeah.
Things going.
Yeah, there's just if only that's. I think that's the remedy, right? I think you should write another response saying, "Look, I'll tell you what you do. Just more daily Trump protests, then that'll eat up everybody's time." Until the school year starts. That's good. Peter Wood, he's the president of the National Association of Scholars. Peter, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen